He said it the way you'd mention the weather. Casual. Calm. Like what he was asking wasn't the most devastating thing I had ever heard in 67 years of living. My son stood in my kitchen with the window I had repainted twice because I never liked the first shade of cream, with a little crack in the grout near the stove that I kept meaning to fix, and he told me that if I didn't sign the house over, I should start thinking about where I wanted to go. I remember I was holding a dish towel. I don't know why I remember that, but I do. A blue dish towel, slightly frayed at one corner, and I held it like it was something I needed to keep me upright. I didn't say anything for a long moment. He didn't seem to notice. My son, I'll call him my son because that's what he still is, even after everything, had moved into my home in Barrie, Ontario, 14 months earlier. He and his wife. I had a 4-bedroom house, and I had been living in it alone since his father passed 3 years before. He called me one Sunday evening and said they were having some financial trouble. Nothing serious, he said, just a rough patch. A few months at most. I said yes before he finished the sentence. That's who I am. That's who I was. You don't say no to your child when they need help. You just don't. His father and I had built that house on 32 years of careful living. We never took more than we needed. We saved, we paid the mortgage off early, we grew tomatoes in the back garden and felt wealthy doing it. When my husband passed, the house became mine fully, and it also became, in some quiet way, a grief I moved through every day. His chair was still by the window. I hadn't moved it. When my son arrived with his wife and their 2 large cars packed with furniture I had no room for, I tried to make it feel like a beginning rather than a disruption. I should tell you about his wife. I will be honest, because this story deserves honesty. She was not unkind in the beginning. She was pleasant, actually. Brought me flowers the first week. Called me by my first name, which I found a little forward. But I didn't say anything. I'm not the sort of person who makes things difficult over small things. What I noticed early on was how quickly she organized. She had opinions about where things should go. She moved the mail organizer in the front hallway without asking. She bought a new bath mat for the main bathroom and threw out the old one, the one my daughter had given me for Christmas 2 years prior, without mentioning it. I found it in the recycling bin on a Tuesday morning when I went to put out the bottles. I brought it inside, dried it off, put it back. I told myself it was an adjustment period. My son seemed happy. That was what I held on to. He seemed lighter than he had been in years, more settled. He had gone through a hard time before he met his wife, a period I won't describe in detail because it still hurts to recall. And seeing him stable felt like a gift. I didn't want to disturb that. I told myself the small things didn't matter. The small things always matter. I know that now. By month 4, his wife had made the living room hers, in every practical sense. Her streaming subscriptions ran on the television. Her candles, very strong, eucalyptus, which gave me headaches, were on the mantel. She had a work-from-home job that required calls, and she'd taken to doing them at the dining room table during hours when I was trying to cook or eat lunch. When I mentioned, gently, that the noise made it hard to concentrate, she smiled and said she hoped I understood. It was just temporary. I understood. I always understood. What began to shift for me was a Thursday evening in February. It was cold the way Barrie gets in February, bone deep, the kind of cold that makes the house creak at night. I came downstairs to make chamomile tea. Couldn't sleep, something I'd been struggling with since my husband passed. My son's wife was sitting at the kitchen table on her laptop. She looked up when I came in, didn't say anything, just watched me move to the kettle. I asked if she wanted anything. She said, "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you." I poured the water. I turned around. She told me she had some financial obligations she was trying to resolve. She'd had a business, a consulting firm she'd started before she met my son, and it had not gone the way she'd hoped. There were debts. When she said the number, I set the mug down because I didn't trust my hands. $480,000, spread across a business line of credit, 2 personal loans she'd taken when the business began to struggle, and a lien from a supplier. She said it steadily, with the fluency of someone who had rehearsed it. I asked her what this had to do with me. She said my son wanted to talk to me about the house. I didn't sleep that night at all. I lay in the room I had shared with my husband for 3 decades, and I stared at the ceiling and I listened to the house settle around me. I thought about what my husband would have said. He was a quiet man, thoughtful before he spoke. He would have sat in his chair by the window, and he would have looked at me and said something measured and clear. He had a gift for getting to the center of things. I missed him the way you miss a limb. Not always loudly, just as a constant absence in the reaching. My son came to me the next afternoon. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, which is where the conversation happened, and he told me that they needed me to refinance the house and release equity. Or if I wasn't willing to do that, to sign the property into a joint ownership arrangement so it could be used as collateral for a private lender his wife had found. He was not cruel about it. That is not the word. He was distant. He spoke with a kind of practiced detachment, like he had already accepted the outcome and was simply informing me of it. He told me the debt was a legal matter now, that collectors had been in contact, that his wife was under significant stress. I said, "This is my home." He said, "We know that, Mum, but we need to think practically." I said, "Your father and I spent 32 years paying for this home." He said, "And we're not asking you to give it up, just to help." That word, help. I had said yes to that word 14 months ago without hesitation, and here it was again, asking for something I could not give without losing the last solid thing in my life. I said I would need some time to think. He nodded. He said they appreciated it. He left the room. The text came on a Thursday, it's like the afternoon hadn't happened. The chicken was good. I ate most of it. She talked about a show she'd been watching. My son agreed with everything she said. I held my fork and looked at the window above the sink where, in summer, I grow herbs in small terracotta pots, and I thought about how long I had lived in this house, and how every corner of it held something I wasn't ready to let go of. What neither of them knew was this: I had already made an arrangement for this house. I had done it 8 months earlier, quietly, with the help of a lawyer in town. The same lawyer who had handled my husband's estate. After my husband died, she had advised me to put proper protections in place. She said it calmly, professionally, the way she said most things. At your stage, Irene, it's simply good planning. Her name was Susan, and she was worth every dollar I paid her. I had established a trust. The house was held in that trust. I was the sole trustee and primary beneficiary during my lifetime, but the structure meant that no one, not my son, not his wife, not any lender they approached, could use it as collateral without my written consent issued through the trust instrument itself. The joint ownership arrangement his wife had described to the private lender would have required a title transfer. The title had not been in my personal name for 8 months. I had not told my son. I had not told anyone. My daughter knew something. Not the details, but she had encouraged me to talk to Susan, and I think she sensed something was not right long before I did. She lived in Halifax, and we spoke twice a week on the phone, short calls, comfortable, the kind you have with a person who has known you your whole life. She had met my son's wife twice, and both times she called me afterward and said, carefully, "Just take care of yourself, Mom." My daughter is perceptive. She got that from her father. In the week after my son's conversation with me, the atmosphere in the house changed in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. His wife stopped saying good morning when we passed in the hallway. She began making coffee only for herself, where before she had always made enough for two. One morning I came downstairs and found she had moved several of my cookbooks from the shelf above the stove to make room for a kitchen appliance she'd ordered. The cookbooks were stacked on the floor in the corner. One of them had been my mother's. I picked it up. I held it for a moment. The pages were soft with age, the spine repaired twice over, certain recipes stained from the 60s and 70s when those dishes were made regularly. My mother's handwriting in the margins. Salt first. Don't rush the onions. This is your grandmother's. I carried it upstairs and put it on my bedside table. I did not say anything about the shelf. My son stopped having dinner with me. He was busy with work, I understood that, but the change was noticeable. Where before we might sit at the table together on Wednesdays, now he ate later, with his wife, after I had already cleaned up. I was not invited to join. I told myself it was natural. Couples have their rhythms. But I knew the temperature of that house better than anyone. I had lived in it long enough to know the difference between natural and deliberate. I called Susan on a Wednesday morning from my car, parked outside a coffee shop on Dunlop Street, where nobody I knew was likely to see me. I told her what was happening. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always valued about her. When I finished, she said, "Irene, the trust is solid. What they're describing isn't legally possible, but you should know that clearly, so you don't feel pressured into making any decisions." I said, "I'm not going to make any decisions." She said, "Good. Have you thought about your next steps?" I had. I had been thinking about them for several days, quietly, the way I think about most things, slowly, carefully, without letting anyone see the working. I was going to leave, not because I was forced to, not because I had lost, but because I was 67 years old, my husband was gone, my daughter was in Halifax and called me twice a week, and I was living in my own house feeling like a guest in it. That had nothing to do with the legal arrangements and everything to do with dignity, and I had spent enough of my life in spaces where my presence was merely tolerated to recognize what that felt like. I told my daughter first. I called her on a Sunday afternoon when I knew she'd be home. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Finally, Mum." That word hit me somewhere soft. Finally. As if she had been waiting for me to get here. She had a spare room, a proper room, not a corner, in her house in Halifax. She had said before, after her father died, that I could come any time. I had not wanted to be a burden. I want to say that plainly because I know some people reading this think, why didn't she just go? It isn't simple. When you have poured decades into a house, into a marriage, into a version of yourself that lives in a specific city with specific neighbors and specific routes to the grocery store. Leaving is not simple, even when staying has become painful. But something shifts. Some morning you wake up and the balance tips and you realize that what you were protecting by staying is already gone. I told no one else, not my son, not his wife. I began quietly, a bag here, a box in the back of my car on a Thursday morning when both of them were out. My mother's cookbook went first, my husband's photograph from the bedside table, the Christmas ornaments I had collected over 40 years, each one wrapped the way I always wrapped them, in tissue, in a shoebox. My neighbor 2 doors down, a woman I had known for 20 years, who still brought me soup when I was sick, and who had never once asked me for anything other than to borrow the snowblower, let me store boxes in her garage without a single question. That is the kind of friend that matters. Over 11 days, I moved everything I cared about out of that house without my son or his wife noticing. They were not paying attention. They were focused on their own arrangements, their own calls with lenders, their own version of a future that involved a property they did not own. On a Tuesday morning at 7 a.m., I put a letter on the kitchen table. I had written it the night before. I kept it short. It said that I had decided to spend time with my daughter and that I wished them well. It said the house was held in a trust and that the details were available through my lawyer Susan, whose contact information I included. It said I hoped my son would take care of himself. I did not write, "I love you," not because I don't, but because love that is used as leverage stops meaning what it should. He had said he loved me plenty of times in those 14 months. He'd said it while watching me make his breakfast. He'd said it while someone else moved my mother's cookbook to the floor. I wasn't sure anymore what we meant when we said it to each other, and I didn't want to use the word dishonestly. I drove away from Barrie on a Tuesday in April. The highway to Halifax is long. I stopped once for coffee in Belleville. I ate a sandwich I had packed the night before, tuna on whole wheat, the way I always make it. And I sat in a rest stop parking lot and looked at the tree line and felt, for the first time in 14 months, like I could breathe completely. I cried somewhere around Trenton, not from grief, not exactly, more like release, like something had been held tight for a long time and finally let go. My daughter met me in her driveway. She had put a pot of tea on. The spare room had a window that faced a small garden. Nothing elaborate, just the beginning of spring in Nova Scotia. Crocuses, mostly, and the suggestion of something greener coming. I stood at that window for a long time. She didn't say much. She brought the tea, and she sat in the chair by the door, and we just existed in the same room for a while, the way we do, the way we always have. 3 weeks later, my son called. He had been to the bank, then to the private lender his wife had arranged. Both had returned the same answer. The property could not be used as collateral. The title was held in trust. Any transaction would require trustee authorization in writing, which was me, and I had not authorized anything. He called, and when I answered, there was a long pause. He said, "Mum, the house, they're saying there's a trust." I said, "Yes." He said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I said, "It was mine to manage." Another pause. He said, "So what happens now?" I said, "You and your wife find somewhere to live. I'll give you 60 days, which is more than fair under Ontario tenancy guidelines and more than you gave me consideration for." He was quiet. I said, "I love you. I hope you find your footing. But I am not responsible for debts I did not create, and I am not going to be made to feel like a burden in a house I built with your father." I don't know what I expected. Anger, maybe. Defensiveness. What I got was something quieter. A long exhale, and then his voice, smaller than I had heard it in years. "I'm sorry, Mum." I believed him. Not completely, but enough. That was 5 months ago. He and his wife moved out of my Barrie house and into a rental in Orangeville. His wife's debt is still hers to resolve. We speak occasionally, my son and I, shorter calls, careful, but present. There is a long way to go before things feel normal, if they ever do. My daughter says to give it time, and she is usually right about these things. I have been in Halifax since April. I take a walk every morning along the waterfront if the weather allows. I drink my chamomile tea at night without headaches. I bought a new bath mat, a green one, and nobody has put it in the recycling. My husband's photograph is on the windowsill of the spare room, next to my mother's cookbook. The morning light comes in at an angle that, on good days, catches the silver in the frame and holds it. I have learned this. The house was never just a house. It was the proof that I had made something, that I had not passed through my years without leaving anything standing, and I protected it the way you protect anything that holds the shape of your life, quietly, carefully, before anyone knew it needed protecting. No one took it from me. The text came on a Thursday morning while I was on a Thursday morning. I think about the dish towel a lot. That blue frayed dish towel I was holding when my son told me to think practically about the home his father and I spent 32 years building. I wasn't frozen. I wasn't falling apart. I was just standing there holding something ordinary and realizing that what I did next would define not just what happened to the house, but what happened to me. What I've come to understand is that the way things ended was not luck. It was not accident. It was the direct result of choices made quietly, over time, before anyone knew they mattered. 8 months before my son sat across that table, I had made an appointment with Susan. I had listened. I had acted, not out of suspicion. I didn't know then what was coming, but out of something my husband always called clear-headedness. Knowing what you have, knowing what it means, and treating it accordingly. That's not coldness. That's respect for the life you've built. My son made a different kind of choice. He let someone else's panic become his own. He let debt that wasn't his to carry reshape how he treated the person who had never once turned him away. I don't say that to condemn him. I've said it to his face, and I'll say it here. But there is a cost to that kind of abdication. When you stop thinking for yourself, when you let urgency crowd out your own sense of right and wrong, you end up doing things you can't easily undo. He is learning that now, slowly, and I hope the learning holds. There's something I want to say to anyone watching this who recognizes something in this story. Maybe not the house, maybe not the debt, but the feeling of being made small in a space that should have been yours. I stayed quiet for 14 months, not because I was weak, but because I was trying to hold something together that was already falling apart. There is a difference between patience and surrender, and I did not always know where that line was. But the moment I understood that my silence was being read as consent, that is the moment something shifted. Protecting yourself is not a betrayal of love. That took me a long time to believe. I grew up in a generation that confused endurance with virtue, that if you kept giving, kept absorbing, kept saying, "It's fine," you were somehow the better person for it. But virtue without judgment isn't noble, it's just erosion. The people who last, who come through difficult seasons with themselves intact, are the ones who know when to be generous and when to draw a line, who have the wisdom to plan before the crisis arrives and the spine to hold to that plan when someone they love is asking them not to. My daughter said finally when I told her I was leaving, one word. She wasn't being unkind. She was telling me she had watched me shrink for 14 months and had been waiting for me to find my way back to myself. I found it. Later than I should have, perhaps, but I found it. The morning light in Halifax comes in at a different angle than it did in Barrie. I'm still getting used to it. Some mornings I stand at the window with my tea and I look at the garden and I think, this is what the other side of a hard thing feels like. Not perfect, not without cost, but quiet, genuinely quiet. And I am still here. That is not a small thing.